when you look at the email, if you intend to open it, you must decide to action it immediately.
Sometimes you get paralyzed because you feel, I need to honor this person by responding in an equally thoughtful manner. It becomes dishonest because, well, I spent so much time writing this thing. Why didn't this person even acknowledge?
For people who say, I need to think about it, just tell that person, I need 5 days to think about this. But you do not leave things sitting there in the inbox unattended.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Mr. Money TV's podcast. And today we have a very special guest. In fact, it's a duo. Yeah, the first father and son duo podcast in Malaysia, a game of impossible. So we have Dato Sri Idris Jala and we have Leon Jala here with us. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I just want to get down into this, right? Why father and son duo podcast?
What's his idea? Leon, why didn't you tell the story?
So I've always been into stories. So I came from advertising. So stories have always fascinated me. And naturally, I thought, when podcasting started to become a thing, I really wanted to start one, to be able to hear stories. But I kept putting off the idea. For years and years, I would keep telling my wife, this is the year I'm going to do it. And then I will never do it. And so about 4 years of talking about it, my wife said, Leon, you need to do this podcast. You're good with deadlines, right? So I'm going to set you a deadline. And so she said...
There's a power of a wife.
Yeah, exactly. So she said, I don't care. At the time, this conversation was happening around November 2023. She said, by March 2024, by hook or by crook, you're going to have to release your first episode of whatever. I don't care what the format is. Put something up by March 2024. And that's exactly what I did. But in doing that, it forced me to think of what would be a format that would allow me to kind of do the thing repeatedly. Because I think with anything, not just content, but all things, you've got to be able to do something for a good amount of times and for long enough for it to then come to fruition.
Yep.
So that was the question. I said, what will allow me to do 200 episodes, regardless of whether anyone listened or cared about it? And so then I started to strip back the layers and I figured, well, actually, I think the answer is for me to have conversations with my dad. Because even if nobody listened to it, number one, I would have learned from him. But secondly, it would just mean that we would have this fixed touch point in a week where we'd be able to bond together and chat intentionally. So that was really how we came up with the whole father-son duo.
Right.
Just my input to that is that I claim no credit for being the creator of Game of Impossible because that's entirely Leon's. But the credit that I give to myself was I was going on a sabbatical last year and I wanted to be away from my normal work that I didn't do anything to do with Pamando Associates. So I called Leon. I said, Leon, I'm going on a sabbatical. I want you to take over the chairmanship of the company as an interim chairman. Don't email me, don't WhatsApp me, and I don't involve in any meeting. You make all the calls and you run the show for a whole year. And so he said no in the beginning, And so after a couple of chats we've had in a few days, then he said, I'd agree on one condition, that we do a podcast. I said, what is this podcast? That's how the conversation went into doing this. So that's why I said, okay, if that's the deal, and I'm okay with that. So my only contribution to pushing this, in addition to the wife giving a deadline, was to provoke him to say that you take over the interim chairman role. And he gave the condition that we do on the basis that we do a podcast called Game of Impossible.
Yeah, because he said no emails, no WhatsApps, because this was my cheat. Because I said, well, if you do a podcast with me, you're essentially giving me advice.
So not so good at putting it, you basically blackmail him into it. So I think this title episode can be Dato Sri Idris Jala was blackmailed by son.
Yeah, you could say that, you can see the best negotiators in life, you always find them, our children.
Yeah, that's true. Now, having said that, I putting myself in a parent perspective, if my son were to come to me and tell me that, hey, I would like to have a podcast with you, having a long time conversation with you, just by my imagination, I think I'll be a very proud father. Because one of the things that I was discussing with a friend of mine was that when you talk about success in life, I think one of the greatest success is that your children want to spend time with you. So how do you felt at the point when he asked you that, hey, Dad, I want to do a podcast with you. I want to learn from you.
I never had any problem doing anything in collaboration with Leon. Because every single day when he grew up, I used to go into his room and also Max. Every morning I'll go and smell his hair. and I will hug him and said,
You
"Son,
forgot to
I love
mention
you."
that wasn't just when I was a kid. But you continue to do that well into adulthood as well.
Into
To be
adulthood.
clear, he doesn't do it anymore.
The only time I stopped doing it when he got married. I couldn't possibly turn up in the room and
Luckily, you
hug
got
him.
boundaries.
But so the bonding between me and my two sons has always been we were just friends. We talk about things. We never had this business of I discipline you, thou shalt not do this. And it's always been that kind of an approach of raising the kids. And I mean, we're both Christians. So I always believe the foundation of any family must be centered around love. Not commandments to say thou shalt not do this. It's love. It's the thing that governs it all.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. So, Leon, turning to you, right? As a child, as an adult child as well, right? And gone through so much with your dad and everything all. I think we've seen a lot of people who don't quite want to hear from their parents that much, right? It's kind of like a love-hate relationship, right? There must be certain things that your dad has done right that made you feel that at that point that you're going to say that, hey, if I'm going to take over this company, I also want you to mentor me. And I want to have this podcast with you with the main intention, other than creating a podcast, is to learn from you. So there has to be things that he has done right as a dad. Because the truth is, when I see many other people as well who are very, very successful, their children may not want to talk to them. Some even more successful than you, Dato Sri. But you have that where your kid wants to talk to you. So what is it in your perspective that he has done right?
So I think there were two things working in tandem. The first is obviously him just kind of leading by example, his work ethic, observing from afar just how he had sort of risen up the ranks in his corporate work. So on the one hand, that was very inspiring. But actually, if I were to be honest, that was also, I think, something that maybe I struggled with for a while, because in doing that, that also meant that there was a tremendous amount of sacrifice. And so, you often tell this story of a time when you were posted to the UK, we were living there. And during that time, in that particular role, because it was a global role that he held, he was traveling, I think every other night he was traveling. So he was hardly around. And there was this one weekend where he happened to be at home and he thought, since I'm here, I'm going to do a barbecue. Why don't you tell this part of the story?
When I was setting the barbecue, he said to my wife, "Why is Dad at home today?" It really struck me like a ton of brick. Then I realized I've been away a world for every other night. I was not sleeping at home because I was in a hotel room. I was traveling to Budapest, I was to Argentina, name it, 100 countries. And it was a very, very difficult time. It was 4 years I was doing two roles. I was a vice president for retail, Shell Retail International, a petrol station around the world in 100 countries. And I was also vice president for business development consultancy. It's the in-house McKinsey of Shell downstream. Wherever we had problem, my team and I would go there to South Africa, go to Germany, go to Brazil, try to fix the problem. And I was not at home. In those days, there were no Zoom.
Correct.
There was
So that
no
became
MS
the
Teams.
norm for me.
Yeah.
The norm for me was my dad not being around. So, for many people, that would actually be a pretty big reason for you to maybe resent your father, to not have a relationship with him. And, to be honest, of course, there were frustrations. But I think this is where the other component comes in. Despite him not being maybe the most physically present, that thing that he mentioned earlier about making love the anthem of the family, they really lived that out, both my dad and my mom as well. So I always knew that despite maybe whatever frustrations I might have had as a boy, not necessarily having his father there all the time to coach and to guide him, I always knew that there was this bed of love. Because whenever he was at home, they have this principle which my wife and I adopt now with our kids, that not a single day goes by without us saying, I love you to one another, whether it's to your spouse or whether it's to your children. And so because I had both of those things working for me, that actually ended up serving as a good role model, because I had the work ethic, which could have also been problematic, but at the same time, there was that love and security. And because I always knew that I was loved by my parents, it meant that whatever frustrations I might have, I would be able to kind of quickly brush that aside and always return back to that central base.
Right. So I just want to bring back a little bit of the emotional state at the point where he said why Dad was home, right? For the both of you, right? When you say that, were you saying it out of anger, or were you like just purely curious? And for you, when you heard that, what was your response, and what went through your mind
Well,
after that?
it hit like a ton of brick. And I paused and said, yeah, that's true, because I've been away practically half the year. And so from that moment onward, I then asked the question, can I make changes in the way in which I manage the business without being away? So I made radical changes in the things I was doing. So for 2 years, I was doing it that way before. In the other 2 years, I changed completely the approach. I delegated a lot more to my staff to do it, but I trained them so that they could do it. And without me being there, we organized a very different approach to getting it done. But we had to create a toolkit. We call it the retail toolkit. And then we train people within the operating units in 100 countries so that they follow the toolkit. And we have a measurement tool that they do assess internally how they're faring with it. And then we intervene only when we see red color in the dashboard.
That's the one that you talked about.
So when we started to do that, then I realized that we were targeted in our approach rather than shotgun approach. It was very specific rather than a shotgun, simply going to country by country, trying to be helpful to everybody. But we narrowed down the area of focus where we were going. So my traveling was no longer as intense as it used to be.
Right. So you started staying at home more after that.
Yeah. It also helped that shortly after we were then posted back to KL.
Yeah.
And in that role, that was a more local role.
Yeah.
So you were home a lot more.
And when you said that time, is it a clear memory of yours right now, or is it something that you just said it at the point?
To be honest, and I think this testifies to how much of a norm that was. The fact that I actually don't remember saying it, I only remember because my dad always talks about it, but I don't actually have a recollection of saying it. That tells you that actually it was just a throwaway statement. It wasn't actually one said out of anger or resentment. It had just truly become the norm. So it was just an innocent question of, oh, what's dad doing here?
Yeah, that's very true. I had a period of time just last year where my elder boy, Samuel, he would start throwing tantrums quite regularly. And at the end of it, then he told my wife, he said, Dad is not home. Yeah. And one day in the morning, I asked him, why are you behaving this way? And as he talked, suddenly he said, you're always not home. And I understand how he felt. I just started tearing in the car as I was driving. And that became a very big motivation to actually ask yourself, like, you only have two choices right now. You either stop doing what you're doing and quit the business, or either you better make some radical changes and ensure that the way you work is sustainable. Now, I want to bring to this the other thing, right? Which is, you guys mentioned the podcast before, and Dato Sri, you said this one thing: as we age, it is about reduction of choices, right?
Yeah.
I think
life
me
is
and
a
Leon
continuous reduction.
are learning that much more right now. Yeah. When we were young, we always feel that we can pursue everything in the world. But as we're older and we're with kids and everything, you got to balance between these both. And the conversation that we just had just now was clearly a think about balancing. So was there at any point of the time that you actually struggled with the question, am I going to be that dad that show my kids great work ethics and what life could mean by being successful? But at the same time, when I do that, I'm taking away a lot of time that I'm spending with him. And that constantly becomes a battle, right? So how do you manage that?
Yeah. For me, it was not a question of seeking a balance, because you will never have a balance between being a best version of yourself as a father or best version of yourself in the workplace. You can never get the balance, but you will have this equilibrium there. What you're seeking for is a harmony in dealing that. So to me, the way in which you get the harmony is to be totally focused on what matters. And that's why Leon and I talk a lot about the idea of true north. If you are vague and fuzzy about the measure of success, which we call true north, then you're going to do so many things that are not moving the needle. So if you say, your story is Mr. Money. If I'm running a company, I want to make more money in that company. And if I make that the true north, then the question is, what are the 6 or 7 things that we do in this company to make more money? And then everything else beyond the 6 or 7 priorities, they're not important. And so making the distinction between what moves the needle on making more money in the company as opposed to nice to have, you had to be ruthless about it. And the word is ruthless prioritization. And if you have ruthless prioritization on what moves the needle, what don't move the needle, then you have harmony. You can become the best version of yourself in the workplace, at the same time, the best version of yourself at home. Now at home, for the limited time at home, the question is, how do you make sure that the time at home is quality time for the family? For example, we're on a holiday. I love fishing. And if I chose to make a holiday for myself, it will be a fishing holiday. But that's not necessarily what everybody wants, you see. The other types of holiday I would like to have is a family holiday converted into a fishing holiday.
Oh, you brought the rods with you.
So what you have to do is don't bring the rods along with you. That's one. Make sure that you ask collectively. My wife's very good at doing this. She's the one that planned all our holidays. And she makes sure that our holidays, quality holidays for me, for her, for our two sons. And so that is important. The quality of the limited time that you have is most important, not just the volume of time that you have. You can be at home and become totally absent. And you can spend a lot of time with your kids, but not doing the things that matter to them. And so that's the idea how you get harmony between the two conundrum that you have, being the best version of yourself in the workplace, the best version of yourself at home, being ruthless about prioritization, focus on what moves the needle. In a context, we call it the true north.
Yeah. Another way to kind of visualize this is, if we assume balance, then true balance assumes that you actually split yourself 50-50. So I be sort of mediocre at my work or ministry, or then mediocre at the family. True balance assumes a splitting of oneself. Yep. But what my previous pastor, former vicar, Miles, Miles, what he told me once was actually the way that you should imagine it is, for every kind of balance, there's always a fulcrum. So again, if we're assuming balance, then we're spreading ourselves thin. We're spreading ourselves thin to keep that balance. But he said the reality is, if you are wanting to be the best at your work or best at family, there are going to be times where that starts to go off balance. So if it's a particularly busy season at work, then what you find is naturally the scales are going to start tipping this way. If we assume a fixed fulcrum, then the problem is that as that continues to mount, then eventually it collapses and something goes wrong. So what he proposes is, if you want to find integration and harmony, actually it's on us to figure out where do we shift the focus in that particular time, which goes back to what you said about ruthless prioritization, contextual prioritization. If you're in a season of busyness and work is kind of leaning this way, communicate clearly, I think, with your family that this is a particularly busy season, which means I'm going to have to shift my fulcrum to kind of retain some order of balance. Yeah. But the key here is that communication piece. And I'm no expert in this, to be honest. It's a work in progress for me and my wife as well. We try to be intentional to say, if there's a busy season, we communicate upfront that it's busy, so that when that season is over and we define when that season is going to be over, we then be very clear and intentional about shifting back to the other side. And that is essentially how we visualize kind of this integration.
Just give you one little episode. When I was in Malaysia Airlines, we had 20,000 employees. The word ruthless prioritization manifests in me making a decision that I shall never say yes to any invitation by any of my employees for a wedding. Because if I did that, then every weekend, my weekend is finished.
That's true.
And that is what I mean by ruthless prioritization. There are certain things that you absolutely clear, say, no, I'm not going to do this. But you have to be very, very clear, ruthless about this, because every day somebody will tell you this is this and this, and the emotion gets in the way. Yeah. And before long,
and this could be your very close lieutenant that's been working with you.
Correct. I remember you talked about in one of your episodes about investment, making sure you divorce from emotion.
Yeah.
I can't remember which particular episode.
Yes, it's the same concept. Being ruthless about it. Ruthlessly only look at the numbers.
Yeah.
That's it's the same idea here, right? Yeah. And this kind of reminds me, like what you said just now about the balancing of fulcrum. I was reading this book called The Great Mental Models by Farnham Street, right? It was talking about the law of thermodynamics. Equilibrium is actually when all the different particles are moving at very high speed and just transferring to one side to the other, right? Yep. And I think sometimes our perspective on life, we tend to think of it as static.
Yeah.
But the truth is that the balance doesn't come from being static, but being moving fast enough to
Correct.
juggle
Yeah.
between the two sides to ensure that there's a harmony there, right? Yeah, so I think sometimes we have a wrong idea of work-life balance
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something like that, where end of the day, you don't become the best version of yourself in either area. You're half present
Yeah.
family man, you're half present working person. Yeah. I think the idea is just like what you both said, right? It's just really learning how to switch
Yeah.
the hats at a
Yeah.
high speed. But again, then it comes down to the other part is the reduction of choices where like you make ruthless decisions. Like I'm not going to attend any form of a weddings, right? And I was just thinking for you, Leon, right? Just a very quick one. And now you're in the midst of all this because for Dato Sri, these are memories of the past, right? And today, it's also another different world because let's just say career-wise, we take work back home, which in one of your episodes you also mentioned, right? Last time we just got off work, phones are no more there. Today, especially when you talk about Game of Impossible, when you talk about your previous role in media as well, your whole workstation is here.
Yeah.
Social media is 24 hours. Just to give you a quick example was that recently my team is trying to tell me, hey, you need to be more personal with your audience, right? And I was like, yeah, cool. So I started making content. But the only time that I have to make content is by the time I get home,
Yep.
which by then I'm sitting on there playing my phone. And my wife don't care whether am I uploading a video for work. You're just not present, right? And so with all this changing of dynamics, right? How's it like for you, Leon, to find this balance?
It's tough. So for us, we realized that the only way that we're going to have some shot at doing it is in the same way that my dad and I have figured out, I think we need to fix a time to have these conversations and put a bit of a program around it. My wife and I have this practice of doing a weekly one-to-one. In the same way that we
Weekly
might do,
one-to-one.
in the same way that we might do a WIP with our teams, we figured, you know what? I think we just need to accept that we kind of need a touch point to do this. Go through the calendar for the upcoming 2 weeks and really plan things out. Because before we know it, it's so easy. We can say all these things. Oh yeah, we've got to move the fulcrum or whatever. But then when the stuff actually mounts up, it's very easy to just get lost in the work, or on the other side as well as possible. You just get lost in maybe the holidays, and then after that, you find it hard to get back into the momentum of work. So having that communication touch point is so important for us. And, to be perfectly honest, I don't want to be here and be hypocritical as well. We had a season of kind of maybe dropping the ball a bit in doing that. And that had very serious repercussions because then you started to feel kind of tension. And I started to feel like also when we weren't doing that, I suddenly wasn't able to be as high capacity at work as well. Because then when you're doing your work, you've got this additional cognitive load of maybe thinking about the guilt
Yes.
of not having done the other thing. And then actually that hinders your work too. And
Yeah.
so then I started to feel like on both ends, I was struggling. And that's when it was just a few weeks ago, we sat down and said, you know what, I think the reason that we're struggling is that we've sort of not been keeping to our discipline. And so for us, really that discipline of the weekly kind of check-in has been really important. And we use that also not just as a tactical touch point to plan time, but also for us to be able to clear out maybe any resentments that we've been holding. So we have a format that we follow, and it's the same thing that we use in my work as well with the church. We ask 3 coaching questions. The first question is, where are you winning? So we celebrate wins and we get them to reflect on things that have gone well. But also psychologically, why we do that is because it leads to the second question, which is, where are you challenged? Now, in a work context, then this will be a bit more sort of, I didn't deliver this project on time, and then that becomes an avenue to chat. But in the marriage context, then sometimes where are you challenged becomes a touch point for either her or for me to say, in fact, I've been thinking about that thing that you said last week. Actually, it's sort of been bothering me a little bit. It becomes an avenue to have those kinds of conversations. And there's something about when it's planned and that it's part of the set piece that we're going to ask this anyway, where if you're on the receiving end, you're less likely to be defensive. I'm naturally quite a defensive person. So if she kind of gives me feedback and it's not within this kind of confine, then I find that my natural response is to be defensive, which actually doesn't help carry the conversation forward. So we do that as the second question. And then the third thing is, how can I help you? How can I support you in that? And those are basically the three questions that we ask ourselves each week. Then naturally from how can I support you, that's where we go into a bit more tactical. We start looking at the calendar and just planning out our dates so that we have a bit of clarity on where our seasons of stretch are, where the seasons for maybe family time are as well.
Yeah, that's a great one, right? I was thinking about it. So recently, this is what I did. I started setting an alarm on my phone at 9:20. It will ring, and that alarm is written there. Talk to your wife.
I have a similar one. Mine's in the morning. It says, ask her how I can help.
Because when I was younger, even with my wife, having conversation when we were a younger couple as well, when you set these kind of things, the idea is that, why are you so mechanical? It's not romantic anymore, and stuff like that. But the truth is, just like you said, life's a reduction of choices, right? And after a while, the priority is about communication. It's no more about romanticism. And the romance can be alive when you communicate, right? So
true.
Just set that alarm and say, these are 20-minute time to talk. At least we space it out. And like just yesterday, I was having a shareholders meeting. So we're out. 9:20, my alarm rang. The first thing I did, excuse me, I went and give a call to my wife.
Oh, very good.
Yeah,
Very good.
just to say, hey, how's things? So she asked me, your alarm rang, is it?
He figured you out. Oh, it's good. It's
Hey,
good.
that's so good that you
it's
committed
good.
to it,
That's
even
very
though you
good.
were in the middle of an important
very
meeting.
good.
That's
We're
next
in the
level. I
early
haven't done
phase,
that yet.
Early phase.
Okay.
Let's see when am I going to drop the ball. I hope I don't.
One of the things that my wife that we do for quite a number of years now is to keep Friday as our date night. Just keep Friday as the date night. That has been very, very helpful. And so you bring in a bit of romance inside it. It's making it special. And balancing that, if you like, dealing with the equilibrium, if you like, with work. You said we bring work home. I had a simple rule that I use, one touch rule. That means when you look at the email, or you look at the WhatsApp, if you intend to open it, you must now decide to action it immediately. If you're not going to action it, do not read it. Leave it. So action can be responding to the person and giving the solution to it, or delegating it to somebody, or asking that person to say, can you give me this info? Even if you say, I need 5 days to go and figure out how to go and do it, that's still an action. So the idea here is nothing should be left in your in-tray, your inbox, that you haven't action. Because to the point that Leon has said, if you have so many things on your in-tray that you haven't action, you feel guilty. That spoils your day, actually. So, and I always consider every single day, there's nothing outstanding in my inbox.
I must say you're very good at doing that.
Yeah.
I'm quite bad at that.
He has a problem because when they join
Then we
the
are in the same boat.
and I'm very good because I follow this one touch policy. So I looked at it and said, look, am I going to read this and am I going to answer? If it looks like a very lengthy thing, I know the subject is going to be lengthy. I wouldn't even open it because I'm going to spend a lot of time thinking about it. So I'll open it tomorrow. But I think by being clear about your in-tray, doing it that way, I think you feel great. You can walk around and say, hey, I have nothing. I owe nobody anything.
I guess this is part of being ruthless, right? Because if I were to see the email, I'm not sure, Leon, how you think, but I will be thinking I should read it and then process the information and think whether should I respond.
Exactly.
So my first initial reaction is read it first, right?
Yeah.
How's it like for you?
It's the same. Sometimes you get paralyzed because you feel, I need to honor this person by responding in an equally thoughtful manner. But then it becomes counterproductive and counterintuitive if you spend too long not replying, because then actually it becomes then dishonorous because, well, I spent so much time writing this thing. Why didn't this person even acknowledge? When actually the truth is I did actually acknowledge it, but I wanted to think about a better response. So I've also just I've been sort of reminding myself, it's better to just respond with something, even if it's not the most thought out answer.
Right.
But to respond nonetheless. And then maybe if anything, sometimes I might just say, hey, I just want to acknowledge this first. I'm in the middle of something, but I just want you to know that I've read it. And maybe later I might
that's
add
a good
something
one,
to it.
right? Yeah, I only do that if my wife scold me. For most people, I don't. Yeah, but having said that as well, I thought about like what you said, right? And our logic of it. To a certain extent, then I'm also realizing this one thing, right? If I'm going to open it, I don't read it. And it lingers in our brain, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
And you're not fully effective
yeah.
for the whole day
the
suddenly.
whole day because
Yeah.
it becomes a guilt thing for you. Now you owe many people. You are really chasing things. You're
Yeah.
not ahead of the curve. And so, I mean, to me, if you do this, you'll discover it's not difficult to do. This one touch policy. I call it one touch policy. That means you touch an email or WhatsApp. A lot of people do. You know what they do? Disable the blue tick.
I've been very tempted to do the
I
same
never
thing.
disable my blue tick because I never owe people.
Yeah.
When I open it, I'm going to respond.
It's true, because you straight away know what to do. If not like for me like that, I'm not sure about you, right? But for me like that, it'll be like later in the day when I'm having lunch. If I have any space, I'll be thinking about that.
Right.
Yeah,
It just creeps in and I'm not present again,
yeah,
right?
No, yeah,
There you go.
exactly.
Yeah.
I really encourage a very simple trick. I mean, for people who say, I need to think about it, just tell that person, I'm going to need 5 days to think about this. That's all. That's still an action.
I have no time for this right now.
Yeah,
It's an action, right?
still in action. But you do not leave things sitting there in the inbox unattended, because it gives you the feeling that you are the whole world is on you and you are chasing deadlines and you are really unable to cope. But when you look at there, you walk around. I'm good. I don't owe anybody anything today. I'm good. And if you practice this habitually, then you realize you can master it. Actually, it's not a problem at all.
Actually, another practical tool. I used to not like people who did this. So our vicar, Evil, right? He has a habit of doing this. And when he used to do it, I used to think, it's very difficult when you send things like this to me. But I've come to realize the value in it, which is the voice note. The value of the voice note. Because I think for me, one of the reasons why I spend so much time sometimes thinking of a reply is because I used to be a copywriter. So I take the craft of the words very seriously. I don't want to just simply send something. I really want to make sure that I convey the thought, convey also the sincerity in the message. And that becomes another layer. But I realize when you do a voice note, you don't have to think about it, because even if you're a little bit loose in how you're speaking, sometimes the sincerity and the tone, whatever it is, all of that is implied in your voice. So you don't have to craft the words to do it. It's implied in the way that you're
That's
communicating.
true. Maybe I should start sending voice note. Maybe I'll be more effective in that way.
It's true. So I'm like, you know what? If I start to feel like I'm a bit like leche to reply it, I'm just going to send a voice note.
Yeah.
Send a voice note first, but then again with the caveat, later on maybe I'll organize my thoughts a bit, but I just want to like chime in, initial quick take, here's what it is, and then I'll send you something proper later.
Talking about the game of impossible, you guys always talk about making the impossible happen, making like a game and everything all. But are there any points that you think that this is really impossible? Forget about not making the impossible possible, because it is just really impossible. Were there situations like that you guys have gone through?
Oh yeah, definitely. We have like that every week. Because when you put the impossible as a very big target that you want to achieve, say at the end of the year, we have broken them down to small, minute things and activities that you have to do on a week-by-week basis. Then you realize that if you cannot solve the problem on a week-by-week basis, it goes into what we call an escalation.
Yes.
The person that's doing it cannot solve it. It gets to the next level, right up to the CEO. And if we realize the whole chain has been involved in trying to solve the problem and it cannot be solved, you then conclude this idea is to be canned. You have to put it aside because it's an impossibility. None of us in the entire organization can solve this problem. So that means that activity leading towards your true north will have to be abandoned because it's a failure. It cannot be solved. It's impossible. But what you don't change is the target is not changed. The true north target, for example, to achieve 1 billion net profit after tax, that has not changed. But the activities that you are working on may change. You may drop some. So we call them the 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3 rule. It means this. In your true north targets that you intend to achieve, which is impossible, there are 3 types of things. The first 1/3 is things that are implemented exactly as per your plan. Exactly as you plan them, you implement them exactly the same thing. The second 1/3 is the ones that you're going to modify and refine based on experience, based on data, based on sometimes modifications. The other 1/3, the last 1/3 is things that you completely misread and you have now junked and abandoned them and replaced them with new activities. Completely that was not in your original plan. So when you put these three things together, the 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3 rule, you realize this, that the world is not static. Whatever was in your plan, you have to be adaptive in it, making the changes so that you know very well that there's a 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3. That's the rule of thumb. And so when you start to do this, you're not pedantic in pursuing things that are completely dead horse. You know, you will abandon them. There's a term that an old boss of mine in Shell used to say, many people think it's politically incorrect to say that, killing puppies. So we asked him, why do you use such a term? Because a lot of people have pet projects, he said. This is my idea. I will never abandon this. It's because my pet, this is my project. So if you have a puppy that you love, even if you love the puppy and you know this is absolutely not contributing to moving the needle on True North, you have to abandon it.
Having said that as well, right? When we are talking about trying to achieve end result, very often we are talking about teams, right? And as you mentioned just now, as things get escalated up, it turns red in your dashboard. But sometimes you may come to a situation where you know that task is not impossible. It's just that the team is impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah, which, how do you then deal with such a situation? Because I believe like for both of you, coming from different kind of organization, bigger organization, and you have dealt with smaller organization as well, like currently right now. Yeah, how do you maneuver this? Because you may be in a situation where you know that is possible if you have the right team, but currently you do not have the right team. And so then it adds another layer of complication, right? Because this ruthlessness now...
I see. That's exactly the reason why we have the automatic escalation. So if the person doing it or a team doing it, they cannot solve the problem, it moves to the next person, which is the manager. And if the manager can see it's a problem with the team, then he might say, well, this is the problem with my team. I changed the team configuration. And so it moves to the next level. If the manager cannot handle it, it gets to the managing director. And the managing director, hopefully, this lady or this person has a much bigger vantage point to see what's needed. Maybe there's a much more radical thing that you have to do, not just changing the configuration of the team. The entire team may need to be changed. Maybe. And so the idea of the automatic escalation, giving them deadlines, 2 weeks for each person to do it. If you cannot solve within 2 weeks, it will be escalated to the next level. And therefore, the beauty of this too is like this. Let's suppose you were supposed to do something and you didn't do it. I can conclude that you are inefficient. I can jump to the conclusion that Peter is no good. If you can't resolve it, it comes to me, Then I realize after 2 weeks, I cannot resolve it. Then I realize it's not you that is a problem. And I realize I cannot pin you down and say, well, Peter is inefficient. I changed my mind because I cannot do it myself too. And then you see the beauty of doing it this way. It becomes a fair system so that you don't become too judgmental on people down below.
Right.
Because the problem that they cannot resolve becomes your problem. And you have a deadline to go and resolve it. And I think if you put a system like this, it brings fairness in the assessment of people in through the system. And also the most important thing is this. I believe that everybody that carries the badge of being a leader must get involved in problem solving. Nobody should carry the badge of a leader or leadership if they're not involved in problem solving.
Another version of that I've heard, and I thought that was quite a good one. I think Steve Jobs used to have this mantra in Apple where it goes with, you do not manage the people, you manage the product, you manage the standards.
Yeah.
So as a manager, your goal is not to make sure whether they're happy or not. Your goal is to make sure that the product fits what we need to get out of. So therefore, if your people can't do, you need to make sure that you can do it, right?
Yeah.
So this whole thing here kind of have this whole check and balance where if you can't do it, I got to do it. If I can't do it, means that I don't have the skill to do it. So it's no right for me to judge you. And if I can't do it, it escalates up to my boss. So suddenly now it becomes either do we as a team learn up a new skill to attempt it again, or we just entirely abandon and kill the puppy like you said,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Now, I was wondering to myself, right, this in a corporate setting, it could be slightly easier, right? But let's say like for you, Leon, currently now you are working in church as well, right, as a pastor. We know that in that setting, it is a lot less corporate. Probably sometimes is the closest that you can get to a startup, where people come together and work in this company, not because it's the most prestigious, not because it's paying the highest, but because I love this environment. And now suddenly now it turns into a high efficient mode, right? Yeah. And how do you juggle this between hitting the targets?
So what we do is, I think we make it quite clear first and foremost that I think in the church context, within that kind of hub of other entities that sit there in Lot 10, we say that we generally will lean more towards high character than high competence. But having said that, we still define what the expectations are for high competence. And as much as possible, we try to tie those to areas of character. So to give you an example, the church sits within a wider hub of entities, the Alpha Hub. And so as a hub, we have these 5 culture values. The 5 are A, they spell the word ought. So A stands for audacity, U is for unity, G for generosity, H for humility, and then T for tenacity. In the past, I used to think that all things culture were kind of BS lah. When I first joined, some of you in church might be hearing this for the first time, but I used to think that this was a bit of a waste of time. Very fluffy, like how does this actually translate into the work? I've been to so many corporate town halls and people say, oh, here's our culture, but then you never see that play out in real life. So I assumed it would be the same. But I think where the difference is when, and this goes to your question on performance. So whenever we do our staff appraisals every year, first of all, your 360 feedback, your goal setting is all done in the context of those 5 culture values. So if you're doing 360 feedback, your peers are ranking you and scoring you based on all of those. How does Leon fare in the area of audacity? So audacity is your ability to be bold, think big, play the game of the impossible, because we want to encourage that spirit in people. Sometimes the problem with church is that people, the reality is sometimes people have an impression that church is kind of a place for you to coast. But we don't want that. We want to actually help people to realize that in the past, historically, all of the best art came from churches. All of the best thinking came from the church as well. So how do we return to using church as a place to do that? So audacity is important. So if I'm naturally not a very audacious person, and it comes to my performance review and I'm going to be scored on how audacious I am, it's naturally going to start affecting my behavior. Even if it feels forced, like, you mentioned putting that alarm at 9:20 p.m. to talk to your wife. It seems forced at the start, but I mean, if you kind of put certain habits in place, they start becoming part of your behavior. And so when you know that you're scored against those things, it kind of forces you to be able to operate like that. But we also encourage people in their goal setting to tie a numerical and objective goal to it, so that we can also track you. So this is more in the area now of between manager and managee. Goal setting, make sure that there's a hard metric set to those things as well. And that's where you kind of draw the balance, because you could say, well, isn't it a bit odd to do KPIs and goal setting? I mean, if you're in church, shouldn't the number one objective just be your relationship with God? Why should you care about numbers? Well, we care about numbers not for the numbers themselves, but because the numbers are helping us to see how are we actually showing character. How are we demonstrating character that's representative of the God that we're worshiping through these culture values? And, we do need to have some sort of metric to make sure there's accountability. And so that's kind of how we navigate that tension.
I like the part of it in terms of how do we tie performance towards a greater purpose, right? Because sometimes we like to take purpose as something very vague and hard to define. But even within our organization, some of the things that we do is like, we say our job is to create good content. And how do you then define good content?
Yeah.
It has to answer a 3 questions for our case. Is it something that people need to know now? Does it benefit them to help them to make any better decisions? Yeah. And also another one more is that, is it valuable to them? Right? And then these 3 are more vague. Then finally, we also have the matrix where if the video goes out, do you hit 50,000 views? Yeah, you can tell me all that, you answer all 3, but after 2-3 rounds of not hitting 50, something is off. Yeah, that's what I can tell the people, right? So I think that's one part to it. Sometimes we think about, especially in the startup organization, why did I bring this up about church as well, is also because I think there are a lot of people out there who run voluntary groups as well. Like whether they are representing like Frisbee organization, like one of my staff here is a national Frisbee player, you're going to run a team, or either maybe you are playing pickleball and you're running some team. All these are part of team organization, right? And I think here's where it gets a bit more complicated because that work there, you're not exactly being compensated because of monetary reasons alone, right? There is quite a lot of a personal intention tied.
Yeah.
And here's where I want to bring out to the next part, right? You guys often talk about big, fast results, right? But one thing that we didn't quite dive so deep into is it requires a lot of sacrifice. Yeah, we talk about ruthlessness. Yeah. And so how do we actually understand, or how do we actually look at something and say, yes, these are the things that we are going to sacrifice, right? I think that's where the difficult decisions are made. We can't say that we are going to be focused on this if we do not know what we don't do, right? Yeah. So how do you set a definition of these are the things that we're not going to do? Yeah. And even after we said that, sometimes that ruthlessness, it's ruthless and it hurts people.
Yeah.
It hurts feelings. To a certain extent, people will ask you a question like, is it worth it? Yeah. And with that teary eye, you know. So how do we deal with that?
Yeah, it starts with the whole organization, whether it's a 20,000 employees organization or whether it's 10 people. The first thing they must do is do a measurement of what True North means to them. Collectively, to the top leadership. Measure, if you don't define that clearly, you cannot be ruthless in prioritization. That's step number one. Make sure that everybody agrees 2 or 3 measures of success. So let's say in Malaysia Airlines we lose money. The True North is to make money. Net income after tax, not about revenue, because we are unprofitable. And so if you're running a podcast, is to say if it's just the number of viewership per episode, or is it the total number of subscribers that you're going to get, make that very explicit. So that's step number one. Step number 2 is then the team need to ask the question, what are the 6 or 7 priorities that will really move the needle on that measurement? And everything else beyond the 6 or 7 priorities, the one that's agreed, they are not important. And so I used to, when I was in Shell, there was one big boss that said, you know, Idris, when you become senior in an organization, make sure that you do not manage by spasm. Meaning to say that there are a lot of managers, CEOs that walk around and do field visit. We call it turun padang in Malaysia, and suddenly walks around and see dirty toilet. He sent a note to everybody in the company to fix toilet. To him, that is managing by spasm. Suddenly what you realize is the little note that he sent there, to him it's a small thing that he saw and he sent it to the whole company. What my boss once said is, when you are the CEO, your cough is amplified into a storm at the shop floor.
Yeah.
Be very careful when you manage by spasm. So this is the point, that when you have agreed these are the 6 to 7 initiatives, stick with that. Because if you start looking at other things that are not there and you send notes to everybody about those other things, before long, those become the most important things in the organization, because they cannot query you, how important is that? So be very careful about coughing. So I think you have to be very, very strict about doing that. And so the other thing to make sure people in the organization don't resist too much of the change is that do not come with the answers yourself. Get the team to take 6 to 7 initiatives. We call it running laboratories. Get them into 6 or 7 teams concurrently for 6 weeks to find the answers. They develop the answers to the 6 to 7 priorities, not me as the CEO, not the management team. Because next time round, when they get to implementing it, they know it's their ideas. This is not the idea from top management, because it's their ideas. And we are blessing them for the ideas, giving them encouragement. And that reduces, if you like, the resistance to change, because the ideas is owned by them and the buy-in is by them and they are the ones implementing it. So that helps. But it doesn't mean there's still no other people resist it, because the folks that came with the ideas, not the whole company came with ideas. There's a representative of the whole organization. There's still the rest of the folks out there said, I was not there. I was not involved in it, so I'm still going to resist it. And so you have to manage the change.
Yeah, you often reference Marty Linsky, who teaches with you at Harvard, who says that transformational leadership is about disappointing people at the rate that they would allow you to. So what is that rate that people will allow you to? I think doing that allows us to have a bit of that margin, because what happens is the reality is, even though you've done this, you align on what your true north is very clearly. You then, open it up to the floor. You get your operational teams to set out exactly what needs to be done. It's all them. They're bought in. You're still going to have a few detractors at the end of the day. But I think when you do that, what it does is it makes sure that that total percentage of detractors is much smaller, and it's not enough to become cancerous and then affect the rest of the operations, because you will still have a larger percentage of people who feel that, you know what, actually at the end of the day, we're still going to stick with this because we came up with the idea. Sure, the direction, the true north might have been set by leadership, but we as the operational teams, we've got skin in the game now because we developed the model, if you like. So that's one of the ways that we ensure that we have that rate that people will allow. But it's on you also. I think it's been quite freeing for me in my kind of leadership journey. And I call it a journey because I believe that we're all students of leadership. Even you are continuing to be a student of leadership. But, in this journey, that one of the most freeing things was actually accepting that you basically can't please anyone. Or rather, you can't please everyone. Because when you're in the business of trying to please everyone, then I think you said this once on a podcast where you said you're not leading anymore, but you're simply becoming a follower because you're following the different wants of different people.
That's true.
But people want different things. And so if you're following the wants, if you're simply reacting to wants, then what happens is we call it lalang lah. You actually lack a direction now because you're not leading people towards a promised land. You're just trying to pander to needs. And I think the job of a leader, even in church, Moses himself, he led people to a promised land, which meant he needed to disappoint people as well. There was a long journey there. People were fed up. People were angry. But he had to deal with that in order to assure them that there is something better coming. If he were to just pander, they would have continued to remain in the wilderness. So what would be worse, to remain and maybe wither away and die in the wilderness, or to maybe have a little bit of a sense of let's suck it up so that we ultimately get there together?
I think as we were talking about all this, right, a few things that came up to my mind, right? Like, for example, we talked about as a leader, a big part of it is to give people hope so that they know what's coming to the end of it. It's about making hard decisions that may not please everyone, but you got to decide who to displease and please. And it's going to fall in your arm and take that responsibility, right? And you mentioned to the most minute of it is, even when you cough, you got to be careful, right? Do you find that these days there are many people who go into leadership, but they actually do not understand the responsibility and burden of being a leader really is, even if you cough, you got to be careful. They think it's a joke, and they think that by being a leader, it means delegating. It means delegating means I don't do much. But just to give an example, right? I've met a lot of people who, when they pick up a leadership position, and when you tell them things that they need to change, they find it, why are you controlling me personally? It's my personal decision. It is not, like, for example, like here, sometimes I tell our leaders here, sometimes if your team are staying back and you're very free and they're finishing off work, you may want to consider staying back with them to show them that you are with them in this thing, right? It's not compulsory, but it makes a lot of difference. Like, do you time to time take some moment and say, hey, let's go and grab a coffee? Or do you walk in with a smile or not? Because just like we said, right? Like a cough itself, I know it. If I walk into this door, I'm having a bad mood that day, the whole team looks at me and they're also going to have a bad mood, right? But sometimes for many people, they don't understand that level, in my opinion. What would you think about this? Do you think that how to draw the line between this is me as a person and I want to be me versus this is a responsibility of a leader? How do you draw that line?
Two things. The concept that we use in Harvard is this thing called adaptive leadership. We're really, really concerned that people don't understand adaptive leadership. Because the starting point must be when you're doing adaptive leadership or transformational leadership, it's a risky business. You must declare it's a risky business. That means you're not going to stay in the center of the circle.
Yeah.
If you stay in the center of the circle, that's safe. You become a follower. People will bribe you to say, "Oh, Peter, you're a good leader because you listen to us. Everything we want you to do, you do exactly as we tell." What they are bribing you to stay in the center of the circle. You're not going to make any changes on the status quo to move to a promised land. But leadership must really be on the edge. Standing on the edge, pushing the boundaries. That's where the resistance come in. But I think, in my view, the way to get people to come along with you to go and do this, you must recognize there are three groups of people in your organization. The first group is the ones that are the proponent of change. They're going to run with you. There's a 1/3 of the group. There's another second group is the one that's sitting on the fence. They're not decided whether they're going to jump on the bandwagon or they just sit on the fence. But it's a group that will be resistant to it. And the first two groups is going to be the majority anyway. So you're going to run with it. You will run with it, and there will be a resistance from those that you don't. But you don't worry about it. You just move. Your job is to explain it to them. That's all. You don't try to convert the third group by spending time arguing with them, because that's counterproductive. They're not going to change. The only time they will change to join the proponents of change is when they see results. Results and results. That's why Leon and I, in the whole Pamandu, we talk about big, fast results. Without results, forget about transformation. Forget about the change process. People want results. What kind of results do they want? They want it big. They don't want incremental results. What else do they want? They want it now. They can't say we want the result 20 years from today. We want it right now. So that's why we say, if you distill it down to what people really want from a consulting body, they want big, fast result, BFR. So results is what count. It needs to be big. It needs to be fast. So in everything that we do, is the acronym BFR is the thing that helps to achieve the impossible. That's another acronym, game GOI. There's a BFR to achieve GOI.
Yeah. So that's a very good one, right? I think when people see results, people tend to follow. I think within my organization as well, I also stick with that rule. If I want to make any change, I will do some workshops to make sure that we get results, so that they see it, then they want to follow, right?
Correct.
Yeah, because no matter what we say, it doesn't matter, right? Now, on the other hand, right, just as I was talking about the sacrifices to make, the leadership part of it, I was thinking about it, Leon, right? I think especially in our generation, right, and the younger generation today, we talk a lot about individualism. But the truth is that when it comes to leadership, there's a lot of sacrifice. You don't talk about individualism that much suddenly. And so how do you balance between losing your identity as a person? Because I'm just the kind of person who like to wake up at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, but I'm running a company where everyone comes in at 8 o'clock. So if I'm going to come in at 8, I'm losing me as a person in that sense, right? Yeah. How do we balance between these two then?
There will always be sacrifices you have to make. No doubt. For example, when I went to government, I became a minister. I had a long discussion with my wife. Right from the beginning, she knew that I'm going to be absent from home. I'm going to be consumed with this work that I'm going to do. Even when I was in Shell, Sri Lanka, she knew that I was going to be really focused on the work in the initial part. So therefore, right from the beginning, she knows that. And every new job that I took when we were in London, I will be consumed by the work. And it meant the impossible, required tremendous sacrifice. So your partner, your wife will need to know this. And if she doesn't know it, you have a problem and need to accept this. So the sacrifice. Many years ago, we invited Usain Bolt to come here to Kuala Lumpur. There was somebody that asked him a question. Mr. Bolt, what's going on in your mind when you are at the starting block of the 100 meters Olympics race? You know what his response is? I'm only thinking of what I'm going to eat tonight. So the next question, why? Sacrifice. Because 9 months, every day, prior to the race, he just cannot eat anything he wants. The sacrifice is he must only eat what is prescribed by his nutritionist. boring as it may get, that is what the sacrifice it means. And every night for 9 months, he must sleep before 9 p.m. He cannot go and watch a Netflix movie post 9. Sacrifice. So there will be sacrifices. The more impossible the target, the greater the sacrifice. So I think for me, gotta ask people the question, do you want to pursue the game, the impossible? Not everybody want to, because they make the choices. They're not prepared to take the sacrifices. That's why, publicly, I always tell people, wherever I address a big crowd, I will say 90% of human beings get buried underground, not fulfilling their full potential for two things, for two reasons. One is because they're not prepared to take the sacrifice that's associated with pursuing that dream. The second one is that fear of failure. They're not prepared to put big targets because they're afraid of failure, because they're not prepared to take big targets, afraid to fail. What they do is that they give incremental and small targets. So they're consigning themselves to walk the path of mediocrity. That means they will never ever achieve the full potential of themselves, because they have now deliberately chosen to walk the path of mediocrity by giving small targets, and they will never fail. At the same time, the reason why they don't put the big targets, they're not prepared to take the sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, thank you for giving your thoughts as the honorary millennial. But it's aligned with what I think as well. I think I would just add that I don't necessarily think, at least for me, that in sort of taking up a leadership position, that I've necessarily sacrificed my identity. I've certainly sacrificed maybe some things on the periphery that maybe might prop up that sense of identity. But I think largely I'm still the same person. For a wider scale, I'm still the same person as when I am sort of as an individual with people. But I think one way to maybe help to solidify that is we have a practice of making sure that with people that you're managing, that you do a weekly one-to-one with them. And I used to think weekly, like, what do you, because in the past, I come from environments where you do your one-to-one with your boss like once a month, if that. Maybe in some cases it's quarterly. But here you're asking me to talk to my boss every single week. What are we going to talk about? But I realized actually the value in doing that is it reminds you of who the human is behind the boss.
Right.
So with me and my bosses whom I've done this with in the past, it's meant that even though on the outside, not to say that they're a different person, but obviously you've got to present your message in a certain way. You maybe have a bit more of a focus, like you said, on things that need to be done as an organization. And sometimes naturally in that time, you can find yourself maybe feeling a little bit like, maybe I don't want to do it. Why should we do this? This feels a bit disingenuous. But when you have those one-to-ones on a weekly basis, it actually reminds you of who the person is. And it makes you think, well, actually, maybe the problem is me. But you're not able to come to that until you have conversations. And so my thesis is always, actually, leadership is always done in the context of relationship. Yeah. It seems fluffy, right? I mean, I used to think it was fluffy as well. But it's true, because actually when you do that, you not only are able to find a better understanding of maybe why someone has asked you to do a certain thing, or if you're on the other end, if you're, let's say, the manager, you get a better understanding of maybe why the person that you are managing has approached the task in a different way. You're able to get the nuance. But you're also basically building trust, and you're building relational capital to then go to the next level. Because again, if we're going to be able to disappoint people at the rate that they would allow, by investing in the relationship, you're increasing the threshold.
Increasing the capacity.
Yeah, you're increasing the threshold for how much you can disappoint each other, The more I do that, the more I feel like I can give feedback to someone who's reporting to me. And in the same way, the more we do this, the more I feel I've got a safe space to be able to give feedback upwards as well. But we can only do that by meeting regularly.
Right. I think it's very true. Like after what both of you say, right? And what I've experienced myself as well, I do realize that, the truth is this: if you ever want to be prepared to be a leader who moves the needle, you just have to make sacrifices.
Yeah, for sure.
And in terms of, especially the younger people, they always think about individualism. Am I losing my identity? The truth is, you don't really need to lose your identity, but maybe there's some peripherals. Like, for example, like for me, I actually talk very loud. So I have this problem in my office. If I have a more timid person coming in, they always thought I'm scolding people.
Yeah.
But actually, it's just my volume is very loud.
Right.
So I developed this habit along the way where after I talk, I will always just check in again and say, if I'm being very loud just now, I want to tell you guys that I'm not angry.
Yeah.
I'm just very passionate about any topic. So when I talk, I tend to talk with a lot of gusto. So it sounds like I'm angry. It sounds like it's urgent and important, but usually it's not. It's just I'm excited. Some can get it, some can't. Now, and why did I develop this is because I actually tried softening my tone. But I realized that is way harder than me explaining.
You're not authentic.
Right.
You're not
So
yourself.
I came to realize that I probably can't change myself for being loud. I'm me. But the least I can do is just explain how am I as a person. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, still there's comment on, hey, Peter, you shouldn't explain yourself too much. You are the CEO, right? But here's where I just gotta make my decision. Do I explain or don't explain? I think the person who tells me that generally trusts me more. But the person that I'm explaining to are the people who don't trust me. So you're gonna be with me. They are gonna get offended by this. You have a higher level of getting disappointed. And your disappointed is just me explaining myself. So if I judge the priority, I think I still should explain myself. So
it's a good way to think about it.
That's kind of like my thought process where I look through all this, and time again, I think whoever who's thinking about delivering results at workplace, I just want to say that, it's just like what Dato Sri say. At the end of the day, if you're willing to set the goals, I think for most people, they feel in the next part is they're not willing to pay the price, right? I've told a couple of entrepreneurs that I've met, I noticed their goals are so great, so big, so well planned. And I think there's a high chance of success. But they're not willing to go out and sweep the floor because they say that is not my job. I'm too high for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, on that, it just reminds me of there's a new paradigm that we've introduced. So, we have those 5 culture values that we talked about earlier, but we've added another component, which is the criteria for promotion, because we realized that there's quite a few of us, and I was victim to this as well, of thinking that you earn your spot in leadership and you earn your ability to have the badge of leadership by virtue of how much you can contribute as a solo contributor. And what that meant for me is that it led me down a path of burnout eventually. And this was many years ago. But we've also started to recognize that we weren't quite there yet, but maybe we were starting to lead some people down that route as well. And so we said, actually, maybe the problem here is we've not actually solidified and institutionalized what the key paradigm is. And so what we've actually said now is that in order for people to be promoted, of course, your contribution is still part of it. And it also is situational depending on the level. But we actually say for each level to move to the next, then what are the requirements? And for the most part, the key paradigm shift is that we don't want people to just be in the job as a solo contributor. What we want is we want multipliers. We basically want leaders. And to be a multiplier is basically for you to come into your role and not just think about how you can be at the best at what you're doing. Of course, that's important, but be the best at what you're doing in order to inspire and maybe become a model for someone else to then come alongside you and eventually actually get them to be better than you. So when you start to set that as the key priority, it helps to prevent people from hoarding work or being overly controlling or even becoming maybe sometimes toxic as well. That was what happened to me, certainly, because I hoarded all the work and there was this toxic trait of if someone couldn't do it fast enough, then I would take over. And there I was thinking that I was being a helpful boss. Like, oh, look at Leon, he gets his hands dirty, he does the work. But what it was producing was the opposite, where people thought, this guy is a toxic manager. He's not admonishing us, but he's like using this passive aggression of doing the work to show us that we're not good enough, when that wasn't the case. And so, for us, the key thing is how do we encourage people to be multipliers, and to recognize that if you're a multiplier, that again is somewhat a sacrifice. You're kind of dying to self. You're dying or you're killing the desire for you to just be the smartest person in the room, but you're channeling that towards how can I be the best in order to help someone else be even better eventually.
That's a good one, right? Recently, I also installed this rule in my company where if you're going to get promoted, you need to promote someone first.
Well, yeah.
So if you want to be a lead, you got to train a senior to be a lead first before you can promote to be a manager.
Good one.
So if you want to be a lead, you got to train someone to be a senior first before you can become a lead.
Absolutely.
Right. So I thought that would be the best way to kind of like institutionalize this whole thing, right? So that people are constantly communicating, they're not hoarding work. They are also more ready for leadership per se, right? And that gives that period of time for them to adapt into it as well.
Correct.
So thank you very much. Right. I just have one more last section that we're going to go through. So let's just take a quick break and we'll come back to the last part of it. Yeah.
Very good.
All right. Welcome back to the third part of this episode. Now, I would like to discuss this statement. People say that the most vulnerable place for any leader is at the mountaintop. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, that's very true. When you are alone, you have achieved some successes. You realize that there's a time when people don't want to tell you what's going wrong in the organization. That's when it becomes very, very lonely because you realize that you are hearing your own voices from the people. And then you realize if you are not careful, you then think that everything's hinky-dory in the organization. It can be very lonely because when you do not hear real noises from the crowd, when people put you on a pedestal and you feel that's a very difficult thing to do.
And it kind of reinforces, right? Because people will keep telling you that, hey, you're making good decisions. You're right. You're so great.
Yeah.
And at the same time, because you also had that ability to came up to the mountaintop and true enough that you have the capability as well, this whole thing suddenly turns into a self-confirming bias for every single decision you make. What do you see are some of the worst examples that you've seen before in your opinion?
Well, you look at BlackBerry. Some of you may remember that. I don't know, you are young enough to remember what happened to BlackBerry. It was the unit that was before iPhone and Samsung was there. Kodak, all these are gone because people have reached the top and they never reinvent. So Leon and I talk about this idea of setting an impossible target. When you reach another on top of the mountain, put another new mountain ahead of you to climb. And every time you reach the top of the mountain, put a new target. They call it the second curve. You must always put a second curve beyond the current curve that you have.
Tell the story about the second curve.
Yeah. This guy called Charles Handy, many, many years ago, he used to work for Shell. And when he left Shell, he came out with his own consulting firm and he wrote a couple of books. And in this book, he says, in the little story, he was driving on this road somewhere in Ireland.
To the Wicklow Mountains.
And then on the way to the mountain, he then asked somebody, can you give me the direction how I should get to the way I want to go? And then the guy said, yeah, very simple. You drive towards this Davis Bar, he calls it. There's a pub. But you reach Davis Bar. By the way, 2 kilometers before you reach the Davis Bar, you should have turned to the left. Then you get there. Now he left it this way. The problem with that is this. You should have turned to the left 2 kilometers before you reach Davis Bar. So most of us in life, we drive all the way to Davis Bar and we haven't turned to the left to create a new mountain. And then we reach Davis Bar, having now so tired to reach Davis Bar. Then you sit down there, sit at the bar. I want to relax now, have a nice beer. Then you retire there. And you have reached the top of the mountain. You should have turned to the left 2 kilometers away. So at the time you reach Davis Bar, you plateaued and you've really got down to a slope. Then you feel that's it. That's the end for you. And that's what happened to BlackBerry. That's what happened to Kodak. They don't reinvent themselves. They don't put a new mountain for them to climb. If they did so, they would have turned to the left long before they reached Davis Bar.
Right. Now, I want to ask you, right, Leon, right, having said that as well, you have come from this household where you have a dad who's successful, right? Who's famous, popular, everyone knows his story kind of thing. But I bet in your life you have also met people who are very prideful, who kind of achieve a certain amount of success. Maybe like your dad, maybe above, maybe below. And some of them could be even more boastful about their own success or even more on top. They sound like they are probably the most successful person you ever meet, but in fact, they're not. And what are your thoughts about that when you look at that and because you've seen one side, your dad. You've seen definitely in his circle of friends, even more successful people. And then you see this who is not entirely there, but he talks like he's there. And so what are your thoughts about it?
What are my thoughts in terms of why are people like that?
Like, why do they do that? And what do they get out of all this? Or like, is it even right? What are your thoughts about it? And later I'll definitely come to you because you have definitely seen people like that as well.
Yeah, I mean, like in some cases, sometimes it's a personality thing. So I often check myself actually, because the natural response is when you see someone like that, the natural response is to want to judge. But actually, sometimes if you spend enough time with a certain person, you might realize that actually their intention is not to overly prop themselves up, but sometimes it's just a personality thing. Like they get so excited about talking about the thing that it maybe comes across as maybe a bit boastful. So I'm also wary sometimes that it might be that. But if it's on the shadow side of that, then I think it usually stems from insecurity. I think at my worst in terms of my leadership journey, a couple of years, this was maybe about 6 years ago, I think that was probably where I hit a bit of a low, where I had to realize that there were things that I wasn't doing quite right as a leader. And there were similar traits to that, actually. And they were traits that stemmed, if I dug deep enough, not because I actually thought I was the best, but actually because at the root of it, I felt that I wasn't good enough. And the feeling that you are not good enough, people call it imposter syndrome, whatever you want to call it, actually, that was what was causing me to overcompensate by trying to seem like I was the best at different things, overcompensate by seeming to be arrogant about my skills. But actually, the underlying cause is because I didn't think I was good. And there was always this fear that I might be found out to not be good. So I better put up a certain persona, I better put up a certain image about myself before someone finds me out. So I think that's probably why people operate like that. How do you stop that from happening? I think I'm thinking about this a lot more intentionally, I think now more than ever. Having done this kind of podcast with you and having built some form of platform, it's not a huge platform, but it's still some, and getting recognition for that. I think the temptation is then to end up becoming high on my own supply, because you've now essentially widened the pool of people who might have maybe an elevated view of you. And so I'm very cognizant that this can also be something that causes me to feel very self-reliant, which is super counterintuitive in my role as a pastor. If I end up becoming self-reliant, then I shouldn't be in that job. So what I always try to do is I talk about having these 3 people in your life, and it's basically around how do you get feedback. And the 3 types of people that you need in your life is, number 1, you need to have a wizard. So this is someone who's a little bit older than you, a bit more of a mentor figure. And the idea of the wizard is the person that keeps you in a posture of learning. So the wizard keeps you learning, gives you something to aspire towards. Then you have the cheerleader. So the cheerleader is that person, or it could be a group of people in your life that will just encourage you. No matter what you do, even if you slip up, they're going to be the ones that will help you to continue to persevere in that thing, to see the bright side. But then the third person, and I think this is for me personally the most important one, is the warrior. And the warrior is someone who is just going to tell it to you as it is. Call you out on all of your BS, whatever you do wrong. They're just not going to brush around the surface. They're just going to go straight to it. And they're going to correct you. So if the role of the wizard is to give you something to aspire to keep you learning, and if the role of the cheerleader is to keep you persevering, the role of the warrior is to keep you grounded in reality. Especially if you find yourself in a space where you're getting a lot of maybe cheerleading from others, especially in this season, I think the warrior is the most important right now for me to kind of counter that pride. And and for me, my warrior is my wife. And I think for you, it's also mom. I remember overhearing conversations when I was younger of my mom has this term she uses for my dad as the man outside, can advise governments on how to run a country, but sometimes there are things at home he cannot do. So I think the warrior is such an important character, or even just a group of warriors to keep you grounded. Another way that plays out is you mentioned earlier that sometimes the higher up you go, maybe you might be inviting feedback, but actually the people around you, they, for whatever reason, they maybe feel afraid. They don't feel like they want to give you honest feedback. So one of the ways that we try to counter that is by just turning it into a habit. So this was started from our previous vicar as well, continues with anyone who preaches now. After every sermon that is preached, even if you are the lead, number one in the church, you will always see our vicar coming down from the stage. And the first thing they do is, instead of addressing the crowd, the first thing they do is they'll ask whoever is sitting in front for feedback. And so as a church, first of all, you as the kind of second in command or even third, fourth, fifth, it's non-hierarchical. The fact that you are having to give feedback to your vicar, that already tells you, okay, actually, my vicar really wants feedback. And so over time, as you do that, you become less uncomfortable about giving honest feedback about how you felt the talk went. But also what it does is, because we don't go to a separate room to say, okay, let's debrief on the message. We do that in front of the whole church at the front, right in front of the stage. It also sets the culture for the rest of the congregation to go, oh, okay, this is a church where even the number one in the church is actively seeking out feedback from the rest of his team. And it's not just seeking out feedback from the number two, but he's seeking out feedback sometimes even from the Gen Zs that are sitting in the front row. So I think actively looking for feedback is a great way to counter this.
Yeah, that kind of sets an example for people to see as well, right? And making it
Exactly.
a norm, right? Now, having said that, Dato, you have achieved a certain amount of success, right? I would say that is already quite phenomenal, right? But like we've mentioned, how do you deal with this issue of pride, firstly? And number two, as you're dealing with it, I bet you have also seen people who are less successful, but they tend to boast of their success even bigger. How do you deal with this, and how do you think about it? Let me give you a context of why am I saying what I say. Because time to time, I would go to events, I would meet people. And in the media space, when it comes to the finance side, I think I'm quite okay. I wouldn't say that we are, but we are one of the top.
You're being very modest.
Yeah, and that's the other part of it, because I do believe a lot in divine intervention.
Yeah.
So I don't think a lot of success is mine. I think, but that's the later part of this conversation.
Yeah.
And sometimes I see people who own that success so much. I do not know whether do I want to say that they are extra boasting, or they just really have that perception, or what, right? And they just own it so much that sometimes I think to myself like, am I being a little too discounting of my own success?
Right.
But when I look at things, I'm like, no, the last I checked, I think that I'm healthier in terms of in business aspect in that case, or thriving even more. I downplay that a little bit too much, right? So then I'm wondering, like, how do we balance this, right? I can't say that I'm not confident. I am quite confident in where my company is. I'm quite confident in my own ability, but I don't boast of it so much. And there are people who will tell me like, hey, Peter, I think it's time that you need to sell yourself more. But there are also people who will tell me that you don't have to sell yourself, let results speak. And very often I notice this falls into camp, right? Most of the time, the highly successful ones are the ones who always tell me, just don't bother. And they are the guys with billions, but just very normal. And then we have the other group where they'll be like, no, you need to sell yourself more because that is what gives you that edge, right? And people don't even have those things and they're selling themselves. And when you have those things, you sell yourself, isn't it better, right? So what are your whole thoughts about this whole
My
thing?
thought is when you meet people looking like that, the way you describe, you look at them, imagine that is a mirror that you look and ask the question, am I reflecting some of that for myself? And so that becomes useful. If you don't like what you see somebody else doing, don't use it to condemn them, but look at that as a mirror of yourself. Am I exhibiting similar thing of that nature?
Yeah.
And the only way you can check whether you are truthful in terms of your story is to check your results and make the comparison. And if your results, by comparison, in the benchmarking sort of way, if it is not commensurate with the story you're telling, then you're not truthful. You're telling a story that what they call partly truth and partly fiction. This is Chris Christopherson's song. And so it's important to make sure you put the second thing you need to do is to then put yourself into a position of being vulnerable. That means try to do something that you feel that will put you in a manner that you are going to conclude you might fail. For example, I worked in Shell for 23 years. To then agree to become CEO of Malaysia Airlines, I've never worked in an airline before. Now you put yourself in a position of being totally vulnerable. If you think you're good at turnaround, try a new area that you are completely uncomfortable. See whether you can do it there. And that is very humbling because then suddenly you realize you can't do that because you can't rely on your past experience of 23 years in an oil and gas. From there, when I said I will become a minister, that's completely uncomfortable. I have never worked in government in my entire life. To put yourself in a position like that, it put you into a level of vulnerability. And each step along the line, when you start a new journey, then you realize you humble yourself that you don't know much about that business. You really become humble because you're starting from ground zero almost. And when I finished my tenure in government, Shell wanted to give me a very big job in London, in headquarters, very, very senior job, top job. I turned it down. And at that time, I was given top offers to run big companies in Malaysia. I turned all of them down. And the reason was this. I wanted to start a new startup called Pamando Associates. I said, I've led huge companies before with hundreds of people there. Why don't I start a new company that we have only 60 people in it? We have no money to run this firm. Let's see whether we can really do it. It's very uncomfortable. Suddenly we have to start the company, we have to hire people and put everything we had. I told the team, we start this company, we don't have clients. In 2 months, we closed down the company. Everybody knew that was what it was. You asked the question, why would I go and do that when I had huge job that's offered to me in London in headquarters? I would have been probably flying on jets and traveling the world and become the MD, managing director, president of a large public listed company in Malaysia. Why would I turn that down? Simply because by being vulnerable to start something completely new, you're testing yourself down to ground zero. And each time I realized in my life, when I start to look at myself in the mirror, I said, I now start something entirely new. It's a humbling experience because you realize vulnerability is a virtue, that you're testing yourself in the mirror. You're starting entirely very, very uncomfortable to go and do this. And so I find that to be very liberating in the things that you do. So it helps you when you reach the top, you start a new mountain. This new mountain is completely new that you do. You're vulnerable, you're starting new. So you start doing that. You stop, to my mind, when you look at people like that, try not to be judgmental. Use that as a mirror of yourself, but do something about it. Don't just look at the mirror and not do something about it. And I return back to the point about setting a new mountain. And that new mountain must put yourself in a position where you are vulnerable because it puts you down to a level you are ground zero, starting right from beginning. That I think is liberating experience.
Yeah, I think that's a good one, right? Every time I reflect about life, there's this one thing that someone said, but quoted by multiple different people, which is, if today we were to talk about the success today that any one of us have, how much of it is accounted of our own ability?
Right.
Yeah, I tend to think of it as maybe 40% if I'm being boastful. The reason being is because even when I look at my current setup, my business, am I the first in Malaysia? No, there are other people who did it, but they did it at the wrong timing. And after a couple of videos, they decided they'll stop, right? I did it at the right time, sustained for 1 year, and COVID
continued.
came, it happened. I married a wife who's okay with me doing this. If she would have fired me every day and said, no, please don't do this, I don't think it would have. Again, these are not my decisions. I'm born in a time where just nice technology became so advanced that we can watch video on our phones, right? I'm in the right place where just nice 10 years ago, I started in financial planning and I had the experience accumulated to explain financial products to people. And I used to do part-time editing for people, which gave me the ground set skill as well. So it is almost like I don't feel like I can truly own my success to say that I am responsible for all of it. I can only say that I made a couple of good decisions and I was placed in the right place to capture those. Do I have an imposter syndrome in terms of like, I don't really think so, because to a certain extent, like, I feel like imposter syndrome means you really own those. No, it's really you. Then you don't acknowledge it. I acknowledge that I did a couple of things well. I acknowledge that I can explain things well but I acknowledge that if I'm not born in this time of age, not with the right time, with the right people around me, I don't think I can fully own that. So I genuinely really think it's like that, right? So, and you guys often talk about divine intervention.
Yeah, we talk about exactly that.
Yeah. And I remember one of the things that a friend of mine told me who became a CEO of a publicly listed company. And he said this one thing. There's one difference between a CEO and a normal employee is the fact that you can live with uncertainty. Yeah. And so as part of it, maybe can you guys share with me, right? What are your thoughts about this whole thing of being in a position where you gotta do the right things, but yet there's so much of uncertainty? And how do you deal with this whole thing? Because for most people who are trying to seek for certainty, it is better off that I do something that can give me the immediate result. I'll give you a good example of that, right? Time to time, I'll come across certain employees who, if I tell them, can you make sure that we get 50,000 views? This is not a real example. So don't get offended. For example, I say, can we make sure we get 50,000 views? That is the goal, right? Then the person may actually stand up and say, hey, that's a good idea, right? I believe in it, but I'm not sure how to get it done. So can we sit down for a conversation? Now, then the person will ask you how to get there. Now, then you may share your thoughts. I think this is what we can do. And the person will start listing all these things down and start following it. But when it fails, then the person will say that I followed every single instruction and it didn't work. So I've done my part.
Yep.
And they're very proud that they've done their part, but the result never hit.
Yeah.
So you just go into this, And so my point I want to make is that, but yet at the same time, if you want to be a leader and you want to be a highly effective person that achieve mountains after mountains and after mountains, you got to be able to own that result, which a big part of it is uncertainty. And so how do we deal with that?
Our simple checklist that we ask everybody, all listeners, take a piece of paper today, write down all the top big things that happen in your life and ask the question against each one of them. Did this thing happen exactly the way it did because you caused it to happen? If the answer is yes, put a tick. If the answer is no, put an X and count them. On my sheet, 60% of the things on my sheet, the 10 things, it's got nothing to do with me. I never applied to go work in Malaysia Airlines. I never applied to do a Shell job. Many things were outside my scope. My ambition in life was to be a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer today. So many things has happened. So I really believe that you could call it luck, it could call it fate, it could call it feng shui, it could call it God. Whatever it is, we're not in charge. You can only play and contribute to making the changes on the 40%. The 60%, it's divine intervention. That's why Leon and I call it divine intervention, simply because this is a very important part of leadership in my view. Leadership includes humility. That humility, the vulnerability is a virtue, that you humble enough to know the world is not at our feet. So that's very important for you to do. So why is that important is this. In leadership, Peter, all you need to ask of yourself and people in your team is that they do their best. Results is not guaranteed. And so you don't shoot people, know yourself. If you've done your best and the results not accruing to it, it's okay. Absolutely okay to do that. But I don't take any prisoners. No prisoners when people don't do their best. So I'm tough when people are not doing their best. But when they have done their best, the results not accruing, it's okay. So in the story that you gave before, that guy has done everything, but the viewership has not increased to the target, the 50,000 target that you. It's okay. What you're going to do is that guy and you have a chat about what can you learn from it, what changes can you do to make sure that you achieve the target. But you don't go and blame the guy for, oh, it was the wrong thing. Even if it's not his idea, somebody else's idea, you don't blame that guy. You did it to the best of your ability, but the results not accruing. It's okay. Life is okay. When you have this attitude, it's just a freeing attitude that you don't go and shoot yourself in the foot and other people as well when they have tried their best. So the only mantra you say in the organization is, this is our true north, and we agreed what we're going to do. And if we don't achieve it, it's okay. The question is, what can we learn from it to make the changes to make sure we achieve it?
That's a very good one, right? I think at the end of the day, it's about if we acknowledge the fact that we only have control about certain things, and then we only work on that, and the rest we just leave it to God, leave it to feng shui, leave it to whatever that you have in mind, right? Yeah, and then we should be able to live with peace with that, right? I think it's the same thing when you took on the job in, you rejected all those jobs and did Pemandu, right? Yeah. Maybe there are times that you look back and ask yourself, maybe that could give me a private jet. This one still can't give me a private jet yet. But it's okay, right? Because I did what I can. One more part just to explain a little bit on, I think I need to explain a little bit on that. I think when it comes to say that, if let's say I were to ask my staff to do something and say hit 50,000, when they follow the instruction, I did not include this part in, was that they are supposed to come up with their own ideas of how to get there. But they copied your ideas.
I see.
And they say, I only follow your ideas.
I see.
And you're like, bro, you're supposed to come up with your ideas, not copy my ideas and then tell me it's my responsibility. I think that's the one part. But nonetheless, we are still there.
One of the things that we do to try to promote that is we have this principle called 131. So for every problem that we have, whether it's a problem that you have identified as the manager or whether it's your team that have identified it, 131 supposes that you lay on the table what the problem is, but then you follow that up with 3 solutions that you think might work. And then finally, you give, having weighed up the 3, what do you think is the recommended approach to take? Before then finally throwing it up to the manager to make a call on it. And the reason for doing this is it helps to prevent this idea of, well, you just tell me what to do and I'll execute. Ultimately, it is your role as the leader to give steer. But before you go there, you want to be able to test that muscle or rather build that muscle of problem solving. Because the idea is actually if you start to build that muscle from no matter how junior the staff are, over time that sets the culture. And once you set that as your culture, you're going to be a bit more willing to take experiments. I mean, that's what ultimately most of the work that we do is. I think as a leader, your role is to be able to create space for people to be able to have a lot of experiments. If we are wanting to transcend or to scale a second curve, a second mountain, that requires a level of accepting that things aren't in our control. And therefore, that actually a lot of what we do are going to be experiments. But how do you keep a team motivated in that season of experimentation? Well, the first is that you've got to give them that sense that they're part of the problem solving, which is what the 131 helps with. But also the other thing is defining upfront that these things are experiments. That helps because it frames the expectation. But also then, and this is why we do the lab methodology, it's then figuring out what are the key metrics that we are going to observe in this time, so that we're not just going to remain in experimentation. Let's say if something goes wrong, we don't just kind of loosely allow failure to keep perpetuating, but we use failure as a touch point for reflection. And what's the threshold where we say, okay, you know what, this is not working. So in your case, you gave that example of 50,000. If the next 3 videos that we're trying this new format in, If they don't get 50,000 after 3 or however many tries, then that's our signal, that's our threshold. And after that, we do our stop loss
Yeah, we
and
kill
then we
the
move
puppy.
on. Yeah, we kill it and then we try something else. It's really that. And I'm so fascinated by, Stephen Bartlett. Stephen Bartlett, this guy who has this podcast called Diary of a CEO. If you guys don't listen to it, you should. He has an entire team.
Experimentation team.
Failure.
Yes.
There's someone in his organization with the title head of failure.
Yes.
And that's how seriously they take it, And I think if more organizations, and we are also reminding ourselves of this, I think if we are willing to take things as experimentations, to be able to be okay with failing, but ultimately to fail forward and to fail with intention, then I think that's how we are ultimately going to be able to achieve our impossible. Because the impossible, usually we don't achieve the impossible not because the idea or not because the true north was bad, but it's usually as a result of not sticking with the plan long enough. And by sticking with the plan, it doesn't mean that you stick to one methodology. Again, we always say, you marry the mission, but you date the model. But by being so razor focused for a long period of time over what that measure is. And I think the longer you are at sticking at that, the more you begin to see the compounding effect of just persisting towards one goal.
Right. I like the idea of marrying the mission and date the model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not mine. It's our Vickers line. It's a great line.
It's kind of like, it's very similar to the idea of you hold the goal very tightly, but you hold the methodology very loosely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly
The
it.
whole point is just to get to the goal. And along the way, if things don't work out, feel free to change it, right?
Some people in church misunderstood that. Why is the pastor talking about dating models?
Yeah. So just to add on to the final part of it in terms of pride, right? Leon, what are your thoughts about it when it comes to pride and not letting that eat you up and change you as a person?
Yeah. What's really helped is this one statement. And again, I credit this to my wife. And it's something that she said to me many years back, which was, Leon, not everything is about you. And these words, they really cut me deep. But when I reflected on it, when she first said that, I was offended. I said, hey, I'm sharing these issues with you because I want an encouraging word from you. I was hoping you'd listen to me, but you're shutting me down and you're supposed to be my wife. Aren't you supposed to be encouraging me? But actually, when I reflected on it long enough, I realized that it was highly encouraging because for me to come to that point of realizing that not everything is about me, it meant that I was truly able to come to a place where what I do, I'm taking myself out of the equation, which meant that I'm less likely to feel imposter syndrome. I'm less likely to feel paralyzed about making a decision because of the fear of what people might think about me. But it also meant that I was more willing to be and more likely to be kind in the things that I do. Because if you know that things are not about you, then you're more willing to make it about the other. So not make it about the other in terms of caring what they think about you. That's different. Because if you think about it, caring about what people think about you, actually that's a selfish thing. Because that stems from you wanting them to feel a certain way. So it still comes back to being selfish. So I think for me, managing that has been just realizing that not everything is about you. Yeah. In the same way that there's divine intervention at play, there's also a mindset that's very freeing. And, this is how I kind of differentiate this notion of imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome, if you kind of just break down the key component of what imposter syndrome is, I think in many cases, the feeling of imposter syndrome is just a feeling of realizing that you're not as good as you think you are. The problem and where it starts to become toxic is when we use that as maybe a reason for us to pacify our own kind of feelings about ourselves. I would say that if it's that, and if let's say I have a belief that I'm not good enough and I don't want people to know that I'm not good enough and therefore I overcompensate, then that's a negative imposter syndrome. But I think if you are putting yourselves in uncomfortable situations, in rooms or in jobs, like you said, where you're not familiar and you feel, oh gosh, I'm not very clever. Actually, that's a good thing. Because if you're feeling that, that's then telling you that, number one, reality check, maybe you're not as good as you think you are. But actually, secondly, what that's doing is that's helping you to, again, realize that, you know what, this is a good area for growth. Where the negative imposter syndrome takes over is if you take that as your reason to give up, well, okay, I think I'm going to be found out to be a fraud and not really that good at it, and maybe I shouldn't even try. That becomes self-serving. But when you realize it's not about you, then you will think, okay, how can I learn from these people who are smarter than me, who are objectively better than me? How can I then use that to then be able to share and transfer that over to other people as well?
Yeah, I think this is very true, right? There's this one thing that I always tell people around me is that if you're hanging out with a group of people that you're always the smartest, I think you're in the wrong crowd.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Correct.
That's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And I noticed that over the years, I become very careful of that. If I hang out with a group of people, if I often realize that I'm kind of the smarter one there, I will kind of slowly detach myself more, and I'll go and hang out with other people that make me feel not so smart.
Yeah.
Maybe my philosophy is that it is way easier for me to become prideful than it is for me to humble myself. So it's better to stay in that position and don't think that you're smart. I think that's the safest position to be in.
Yeah. But that's why it goes back to like thinking of the ecosystem, right? Because you also don't want to completely remove yourself from people who are, to use these words, maybe not as smart as you, because then that makes you seem like, hey, now Leon's like not one of us anymore. Like, oh, it's too good for us. Yeah. So it's still good to keep that. But then in the context of having these other groups or other individuals.
It's not like cut context, but it's just that you're not emotionally like invested in it. Not say emotionally invested, I don't care. But it's like it's irrelevant in that sense. You shouldn't take that context and say, oh, I'm the smartest guy.
100%.
Because I can solve problem. But now you know that this is just a conversation.
Correct.
And I'm in here because maybe I have certain experience and I bet in other areas that they are smarter than me. Yeah. Right? But in this context here, I'm the most experienced in this context here. Therefore, if I stay longer in that, I will be giving value, but I won't be adding value to myself. Yeah. And that makes me go all the way up and think that I can solve all the problem in this field. So always I tell people this one thing, right? It's good to be number 2.
Yeah.
I don't want to be number 1. I just want to be number 2. Yeah. Having said that,
Just since you're the first person to interview Leon and I
on a
podcast, this is the first time that we're together being interviewed in a podcast. I just want to try to nail the issue of why we call our podcast Game of Impossible. Because we define Game of Impossible to be a target that you deliberately set for yourself, that you conclude that you cannot achieve it based on the current way of doing it. It means we're then forced to find a new way how to do it. Let me now change the topic and ask the question. If you go to any group of people and ask them, 10 people in an organization, even in your own team, you put a target so high and you ask them, can we achieve this? The answer is no, because it's so high. And you ask them the question, why do you think we cannot achieve this? They will put many things. They will say, fear of failure. They will say, we are not working together because we are in silo. There's not enough commitment from leadership. There's not enough budget to go and do it. There's not enough time and resources to go and do it. We're not getting enough feedback from other people. And all these things, if you listed them down, we had the opportunity of going and asking many focus group. In our experience, there are at least 8 categories of these problems. So it means like this. Why is it that people cannot achieve an impossible target? Is because it's a myriad of things. It's not just one thing. And when you talk to people, if they tell you there's one silver bullet to achieve this, that fellow is definitely wrong. The Donald Trump's idea, the panacea for the whole US's economy is one thing and one thing alone. And to say it's all to do with tariff, that course is wrong. It cannot just be to do with just one thing. So our view is that because you have a multitude of problems that causes you to be unable to achieve the impossible, you have to abandon your current way of doing it, come with an entirely new way of doing it. And we call it 8-step process. And this is like antibiotics, Peter. That means you cannot take one day of the antibiotics. You must complete the entire dose. Then only you're cured of it. And that's why we have developed a proprietary tool called the 8-step methodology. And if you follow every single one of this 8-step methodology, you will then introduce a new way of working. Leon and I have covered this in all of our episodes.
Yeah.
We have episode for each of those steps. And we believe that each of those steps deal with the causes of the problems, their inability to achieve it. So, but you can't say, I'm going to do step 1, I'm going to do step 3, I'm going to do step 6, and the rest I don't intend to do it. That's not going to solve the problem because you have to deal with every single one of those issues. In our view, if you do a comprehensive approach to doing it, then you introduce into the organization a new way of working to achieve that game, the impossible. You try to do them. And if you do them, everything that we talk today, every single thing that we talk today, it's actually covered in the 8-step process.
Yeah.
And I'm totally convinced that if any viewers out there want to know more about how to achieve the game, the impossible, remember, this is an antibiotics. And that you have to take the full dose. You cannot go a day and say, I'm going to do 1 step, 2 step, but the whole thing that we talked about today actually touch on the issues about the comprehensive approach to dealing with this.
Yeah. In fact, that 8 steps in your 8 episode, I recall is in your first, I think in your first 10 or 12.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I listened to it 3 times. I was telling Leon, I listened to it 3 times over quite a period of time, listening again and again and try to nitpick what are the little bit of things that I can do and apply within my company.
Yeah.
And I have to say that it's fantastic. Now, tying back to it, all of it, I think it is quite unique in the sense when you talk about a game of impossible, it in nature humbles us. I think sometimes a big part about setting impossible goals is it humbles us and makes us not settle down in the Davies bar.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
That you kind of walk and you go like, nah, I don't think it's time for me to settle in the Davies bar. And you just keep taking the next turn.
Taking the next
and
one.
next turn and next turn.
Absolutely. So this idea of the impossibility, it comes in 3 things, the mindset. First, it's impossible. Second, it becomes difficult. Third, it is done. So you say, wow, it is done. And then you said that it was impossible before. When we were doing it, it looked very difficult, but not impossible. But suddenly it's done. And that's the experience we've had. People go through that and say, actually, when you finish doing it, well, why in the hell did we think it was impossible before?
Yeah.
But when it's done, it didn't look impossible. But it was impossible before you did it. But the reality is today is that every single step of things that you do today, and when you achieve them, what you even regard as an impossibility, somebody in the world, somewhere else, has already done that before. That's why my grandfather used to say, Idris, when you grow old, you think everything that you do is a novel idea, that you're the first person that's done it. You realize that somebody else has already done that before.
Yes.
And so when you think it's an impossibility, it's not an impossibility for other people. They've done it before. This is already done. It's no big deal,
Yeah.
So I think the point I would to challenge every viewers out there, the challenge that I have everybody, 90% of human beings die and get buried underground, not fulfilling our full potential because of the fear of failure. And secondly, that we're not prepared to take sacrifices to achieve those things. And if you're prepared to get the best version of yourself to fulfill your full potential, go and take for yourself your own game of impossibility.
Fantastic. Now, let's just wrap this whole thing up, right? For the both of you, could you just share with us? Because ultimately, in this whole game of impossible, if we expand it further in the scope, like we touched on earlier, we talk about in the personal life, then we talk about in the leadership context, which is our organizations that we are involved in, which is a big part of our life. But ultimately, I think life is still us as a person, right? And so how do we align that individual true north and then bringing in the different parts of our life, whether it's the organization we work with or whatnot, and slotting it so that we are still steering towards a particular true north? Because right now, there's a multiple true north within that true north, right?
Correct.
It looks like a complicated mental model. How would you simply put it to us out there on a quick guide on how do we get it right?
I've been giving this a lot of thought lately because I've grown up hearing about all of these principles in a very tactical work context. And so I used to think, but that's very far away from me because I don't see myself following in my dad's footsteps. And so I used to ask myself, what does that look like for me as an individual? And in a way that will still relate regardless of what the vocation is. And I think I've arrived at a bit of a guide for doing this, and I call it PASS, PASS. So the first thing is the pursuit that you're after something that has a greater sense of purpose that is bigger than you? If yes, then move on to the next thing. So for doing this podcast, for example, how we arrived at discerning whether or not to do it is I realized that, okay, it addresses the P, because the P was basically, if no one listens to it, if nobody watches this podcast, would I still show up to do it? And I figured if I brought my dad into the picture, then yes, absolutely, a resounding yes. Okay, move on to the next thing then. Do you think that at some point this is something that would be of value to others? The A stands for audience. Do you feel like there will be an audience that would find some worth in the things that you're doing? And an audience doesn't have to be a multitude of people. It can just be one. In the family context, does what I'm doing, would it be of worth to my family, to my daughter, my son, my wife? If yes, then you move on to the next thing. Is there some sort of innate skill that you already have? And I say innate because, of course, these are skills that we can sharpen. It doesn't mean you have to be the foremost expert in that thing. But is there an innate skill or a competitive advantage that you have? If yes, then you move on to the next thing, which is finally, is this something that has scale? And again, scale is not just in a work context in terms of growing a team, but does it have scale in terms of, is this something that, again, if you go back to a family context, can this be passed on to my daughter, to my son? Is this something that they can take on and to grow and to refine and make even better? Or is this something where I can invite someone else in to mentor? So I think if you're able to do the kind of pass, then that gives you a better sense of maybe what a valid true north or valid true game of the impossible should be. And when you think of it in this way, then it doesn't really matter what the vocation is. You can apply this as an athlete. You can apply this in the workplace. You can apply this to your family as well. So that's kind of my simplistic way of looking at it. What about you, Dad?
Yeah, to me, it's quite simply this. The only way you can align your personal true north to the organizational, societal true north, or the way you're working, is that must be something they're doing you're passionate about. You shouldn't go and do a job, in my view, that you just don't have a calling for and that you don't feel passionate about it. If you ask me today, give me a job to become a bank guy that just counting cash and giving money to people every single day, that kind of thing at the counter, I will be sacked in no time because I just am not equipped to do a thing like that. And so you got to do something that you really feel passionate about. And I just kept on telling my wife, and if the beer doesn't taste so good in the evening, that's time to call it quits. You must be prepared to walk and do something. Life is short. Don't spend your time doing something you're not passionate about. And I guarantee you, if the thing that you're passionate about happen to be the thing that organization is doing, and you are right there, I think you're going to get the best version of yourself in doing that. So you must really, really feel passionate about it. That's the only way, in my view, that you align your interests or your true north with that of an organization by choosing an organization that fits your thing that you really want to do. And don't try to do the other way around. To try to go and join this organization that does not align with your interests, and you try to change your interest to suit that, it's going to be really, really hard, very hard to do. You will not get the best out from yourself, and that you don't do justice to yourself doing that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for being here with me in this podcast today. Now, I believe that the audience out there will have many questions, including how to find your calling, as you have mentioned, and how to actually align yourself better with the past method, right? Not the past, but this past, right? No, with all that in mind, if you want to find out more, do check out the individual episode with us as well, as we actually have a separate episode with Dato Sri and one with Leon as well on their own journey. But thank you very much. If you enjoyed this episode, do hit the like and subscribe button and share with us. What are your thoughts in the comments below? Or if you have questions, feel free to put it down there. But more importantly, I think all of you guys should go and follow The Game of Impossible. They are on YouTube, Spotify, and other social media platforms from TikTok to IG, everything
right.
else. Anything else that you want to share to the audience about Game of Impossible? How can they engage with you further as well, or any upcoming activities?
Not really. Just watch the episodes. You'll realize that we basically say the same thing over and over again. But that's just because we truly believe in the mission. And, you can basically say the same message many times, but through many contexts. And so, on the same note of just doing things repeatedly, our episodes go up every Friday at 6 a.m. So if you enjoy conversations like these, you can head over to our podcast and check them out.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.